sorry guys. We were early, which means now we're late. Because anytime I think I have time, I end up not having time. Let's put it that way. Okay, so today we're going to talk about quilt backs.
Yes.
But first, I want to talk about this quilt that we're making a back for. This is Night Sky. It's a pattern by Jaybird. She's the one that designed Nebula and all the Journey to Nebula everything. This one uses the sidekick ruler. The super sidekick works too.
Right. I had the super sidekick, so I didn't buy the smaller sidekick.
I love my smaller sidekick.
If you have the smaller sidekick, this will do it.
But you don't have to have a ruler. Templates are in the pattern. This is a mix of batiks clearly and a Kona cotton black. Jen?
Yes.
Is it okay to mix them?
Yes, you can mix batiks and Kona and regular cottons. The difference really is that during the batik process, because it's stamped with wax, that fabric to get cleaned ends up being boiled multiple times.
Yes.
And this causes it to shrink dramatically and tighten the weave. Okay? So that's why batiks a lot of times feel really like tight. They'll also feel somewhat thinner, and it's just because of the process it got put through to end up dyed the beautiful way it's dyed. So, yeah. But they're still both 100% cotton. They're great. Use them together. I do all the time. I really love using the batiks for something like this because their colors can be so vibrant. So they really pop against this black background.
And because they're not printed, guys, they're dyed, so they're the same on both sides, and so the color runs all the way through.
Right, it's more saturated.
Literally.
Fun fact, there's no right side to a batik. I get asked
unless it's metallic or something printed on top.
Occasionally a batik will be screen printed after it's gone through its whole batiking.
If it has a metallic element on it, it's been printed, there's a right side.
There's a right side.
Although if you put it on the other side, you just don't get the metallic effect.
Right.
So it's fine.
Right.
So anyway, this is Night Sky. We have a few kits available. If you go to our website, the picture is not on there.
No, it is now.
It is.
I
Jen
just fixed it.
Okay, it wasn't on there, and that's because Jen was still making the sample.
Right.
But
so this sample needed to be correct.
What we're talking about today, I cut some fabric for a back for this guy, and so we're going to talk about putting it together, and we're going to talk about wide backs. And I think that backings are that thing that we all just assume is the easy peasy very last step of a quilt. We don't worry about them. And we want to talk about how there is a right way to do backs.
Right.
Not that you're all wrong.
No.
But information's always helpful because when you know better, you can do better.
You can do better. And, you know, part of it is our experience long arm quilting, especially with other people. We deal with what gets brought to us.
Lots.
So we see things done really well. I see things done where I feel sad. And so I want to help you know how to do better.
Maybe make your long armor really happy.
Right, or yourself if you're loading it on a long arm or doing it yourself. But anyway, so like for this one, when it comes to calculating a back, how much fabric do I need? Oh, side note, we don't quilt sheets. I don't use a sheet as a quilt back. Partly because they tend to be a tighter weave and they're harder on my long arm.
If you are going to use a sheet for a quilt back, you're using the cheap 200 thread count sheet. If you bring somebody a 1,000 count thread,
it's not good. Anyway, I will refuse it. Just so you know, at the shop we don't do sheets. Partly, guys, the back is an important part of the quilt.
You spend all the time and money on the front.
All the time and money on the front, and
there are cheaper ways to do it.
Let's give the back some love too. Because it is an important part. Anyway, let's talk about calculating how much fabric you need. So this quilt ends up being 56 inches wide by 64 inches tall. Or 66 inches tall, I think. Something like that.
There's peaks and valleys
anyway,
so it's a little different.
So I look at that and think, okay, my quilt's back needs to be 4 inches larger around. So the 56 wide becomes 64 inches because I've added 8. To that. You know, my 66 becomes 74. Well, I look at that 74 and I know from all of this that 42-inch width of fabric ain't gonna cut it. So I'm gonna have to do a seam. Well, if I do a seam,
you got about 86
then I've got about 86 inches. Okay, well, so that's gonna cover my longer end. So that's great. So I need to look at that 64. So I need 2 lengths of 64. So 64 plus 64 is 128. Because I'm a nerd, I know that 108 is 3 yards. Otherwise,
20.
you can just divide by 36.
You can. That's a lot.
Anyway, that gives me another 20 inches. Well, 20 is 2 past half a yard and not quite 5/8. So,
you need
because the shops don't sell random inches usually, I know that I need 3 5/8 yards. Mm-hmm. So this is how we calculate it back. Now there's an old school rule, I'm told. The back
it's too old
should
school
go
for me.
Vertical. The seam should be vertical. I say no.
I vehemently disagree as a long armor. I would like it horizontal whenever possible.
Well, at least for me to load. Now, I don't see any reason
it can be vertical. That's
why I need another 30 inches of fabric here.
Just so you're seeing
now,
this big.
If your fabric's directional, then that might be an issue.
Absolutely.
But we went with this lovely green batik right here. It's not directional. I'm going to use the most economical use of fabric. And that means I need 3 5/8.
Which, if she went the other way, she'd need about 4.5 yards.
Right.
So it is a cost savings of a yard of fabric. That said, buy the extra 1/8 of a yard once in a while. Okay, guys? Like, if you need this and it's barely going to be 6 extra inches, buy the extra 1/8 of a yard.
Just, Mo, we appreciate that.
Just do it because
you're great, though. Don't worry.
It's not worth skimping the back if you're long arming. Now, if you're quilting on your domestic machine and you're going to baste it on your floor,
you probably don't need quite as much
extra. But if you're going to send it out, or if you're a long armor, that extra is really, really vital as far as getting it on the machine right, having the space we need to work, and having the space to clamp your sides so that we keep the tension even on the back.
Right. And part of it too, part of the reason I need, I say I need 3 or 4 extra inches all the way around is, as the long armor, I need to have the ability to place that quilt whichever direction I need to, depending on the pantograph we've chosen or the seam. There are several factors that make me decide how to put it on the long arm.
And once in a while, we even quilt it sideways because
a lot of times
we quilt it sideways all the time because it actually works out better. The panto's not directional, so it works out.
Okay, anyway. Another option that is less expensive than buying regular 42-inch wide fabric is a wide back. So most of our wide backs are about 108 inches wide. Some are marketed as 106.
We have one that's like 116.
We have one that's 116. So these are a lot nicer because most of them are somewhere around $18 a yard.
18 to 20 a yard, which sounds really expensive until you realize
it's 108 inches wide.
It's 2.5 widths of fabric instead of.
And so when I'm looking at a quilt like this, if I were to buy a wide back for it,
you need 2 yards of it instead of 3
I would
5/8.
need less than 2 yards. I could buy like 1 7/8.
So now, the thing I want to tell you about a wide back is it is folded twice on a bolt. There's a fold here and another one in here. Mm-hmm. Which means, I don't know if you guys can see all these creases. This is for the village quilt I'm assembling at home. It means fabric is never straight on the bolt, straight of grain. It just doesn't happen in the way that it's folded and wound. It's just impossible to have it straight. Wide backs are beyond, not straight of grain. Just absolutely beyond. So one side of this wide back right here is cut. And when I got here this morning, before we unfolded it and played with it for a minute, this was a perfectly straight cut. Okay? It isn't straight. But it was perfectly straight. It looked like the straight line. The other end, I tore yesterday when I took it off the bolt at work. And it doesn't look straight, you guys. It looks like it's all over the place. But when you tear fabric, you end up tearing 100% straight of grain. If you're old school, you know that fabric stores used to always tear fabric all the time.
Before the invention of the rotor cutter.
Before the invention of the rotor cutter, tore fabric. I remember watching fabric getting torn as a kid, but I'm really not that old, but for some reason it does ring a bell with me. But this is how we get it straight of grain. So when we sell you a wide back in the shop, often we're going to say, can I tear that for you? And I have people that look at me appalled, like, how dare you tear fabric? But this is why. It's to get it straight of grain. And I want to show you, I'm going to tear the other end. And I want to show you just how off what was my perfect cut is. I don't know how off it is, but based on the other side, I'm going to go a couple inches in. And I made sure to get myself a few extra inches of this fabric, so I got plenty. But, so I'm about 2 inches here. Look how skinny that just got. Let's see if I even tore wide enough.
But this is how we get it straight. So a lot of times...
You see, now it's getting wider.
Right.
And we're still straight, you guys.
because it's going with the grain. When you tear, it will stay with the grain.
But what looked like a perfectly straight cut was this off, as far as how it was wound.
And if you look at this, this is 1/8 of a yard.
So if you're going to have your wide back cut and you're going to insist on it being cut, I'm going to ask you to make sure you buy an extra 1/8 of a yard.
Or because, a quarter.
Yeah.
When you leave it for me to
I will hope that there's enough and I'll tear the sides.
I'm probably going to tear it out again. Because that way, like we said, I can put it on straight.
But
and it's important that a back is straight.
Square.
So I'll get pieced backs in sometimes where, you know, you sewed your 2 pieces together, but you left a 2-inch overhang on one of those panels.
I gotta tear that off.
That becomes a problem for me, so I have to trim that off.
Because I can't load it square.
So when a back comes in, it needs to be a square. No weird little extra sides.
So what I would, because when we load these, just explaining the long arm world, because I know a lot of people don't know it, what we do is we find our center. And now my center is straight of grain on both ends.
Which is awesome.
And so this, when I roll it, it's going to, it was crooked on the bolt, but because I roll it, I'll roll it up and roll it back, and then it's going to be perfectly square on my machine. It's going to quilt up really nice, and it's going to be a perfectly square back on a quilt. And then there's not going to be any weird shifts or anything adjustments. So, but that's how we make sure we get wide back square, is by tearing it. So please, like, don't be
afraid of it.
And yes, there is that bit of a frayed edge. If you press it, you're going to lose maybe 1/4 of an inch. I always tell people, don't worry. I mean, that's that little overage that we buy so we can clamp. So it's not really long-term. It's not fabric we buy to piece with. It's fabric we buy to be able to clamp on a long arm.
This isn't doing its job.
It's doing its job by being this way. But if you do like to use your little scraps to come off, you're going to lose maybe 1/4 of an inch once it's pressed. And it's totally worth it, by the way. Totally. Personal opinion. To get it done. Okay, let's talk about piecing this
Let's talk about piecing the quilt back.
This guy.
So there are several ways to do this. It's going to depend. My method is going to change depending on what fabric I'm working with. So like I bought my fabric for my flea market quilt kit the other day. And I bought my back because I wanted to use yardage instead of a wide back. That fabric is directional.
Yeah.
And so I am going to cut 2 pieces the same size. I'm going to sew them together and square off the ends. Now, this one, because it's not directional, what I'm going to do, so here's my big piece. I'm going to leave it folded in half, and I'm going to grab these 2 inner selvages here and just start sewing. Now, we've told you before, and I'll tell you every time, selvage is not fabric. So this has to come off.
A piece of washi tape?
I would love a piece of washi tape. So selvage has to come off. Please, please, please don't leave the selvage inside your quilt. Okay?
Someone stole it.
This is really unfortunate. I'll just use the edge here.
Okay.
Because once that quilt gets washed and used, it's gonna shrink up on that selvage because it's woven differently.
It's a tighter weave, and the selvage is there in the production process.
So we don't want the seam of your quilt to pucker in. That's really unfortunate. So please remember to cut your selvage off inside on the seam. But now the selvage on the outside, please don't trim that off. Leave it on. The reason is it's nice, it's straight, it doesn't stretch, so it makes putting it on the long arm. I love to pin and clamp on selvage.
Love it.
I love it. It's nice and straight. It makes for a more precise process. But get it out of the inside of your quilt back.
Selvage on the outside, great. Inside, no bueno. Seriously?
Yeah, we're good. Wow.
We have problems, you guys.
Guys, we even, like, I know you guys can't tell, but we totally matched today.
I haven't worn a long tunic-y sweater in, I don't know, 9 months. I wore one today, and of course, so did she.
Right. Black leggings. This is how we work.
That's what we do. Okay, so feel free to backstitch.
I just backstitch a little bit because I know I'm going to pull on it.
When you're piecing your back, she's doing about a 1.5 inch seam here, and that's because she has the selvage, and we're going to be able to trim that away
here in a minute. So I'm just going to get this stuff out of my way.
And we haven't cut this piece of fabric in half yet.
It's still folded right here. But I'm not going to cut it yet.
We'll show you.
I'll get there.
And once again, you guys, she needed 20 inches. She got 22 and a half on top of those 3 yards. And that's going to give us a little bit of room.
A little bit of wiggle
to
room.
straighten the other side.
Mm-hmm.
So, at home, what I do on my Bernina is I have a piece of washi tape I put in at like 1.5 inches in because I don't have a seam marker for 1.5 inches on my machine.
Right.
And so I have a piece of washi tape on there, and that becomes my seam guide.
Luckily, this one has a nice wide needle plate, and so I can, except I just broke my thread.
Oh, good job.
Don't you need to fold that the other way?
No, it's fine. We got it.
Mom's double checking us. This got wrapped around this guy. There's
Okay.
the little piece that
Just
goes
rethread
there.
the machine. No, it's fine. I know. We got it. I'll show you. Give us a minute. She double checks on us. It's okay.
I didn't put the little plasticky thing that goes there to keep this from bouncing around.
Oh, I thought we had one.
I know.
Anyway.
I don't know where it went.
Okay,
Anyway.
so we're
that's
going to
fun.
do this. Another thing, especially with batiks sometimes, those selvages on batiks are a little bit different.
They are different.
Sometimes you'll want to press those.
I'm going to treat this as if it wasn't a batik.
But sometimes those selvages can be a little...
These are very
they're not as
not as
stiff
flat.
as
so
your traditional selvage.
nope, but it's
Does that
going to be
make
fine.
sense? But we're going to go ahead and let her piece this. It's going to be one big long seam.
Right. Nice and boring.
Yes.
Liz will entertain you with something else.
Right? I don't know. Be interesting. Not that interesting. Anyway. No, we wanted to talk about this today because it's a piece of information, or pieces of information, that I don't think regularly get shared. And especially if you don't use a long arm, you probably don't deal with any of it. And so it's news to you. But even if you quilt on your domestic machine, it can make your backs flatter and squarer. And like I said, knowing that you need to get the selvage out of it, it'll help it wash up better.
Right. I get some beautiful quilts with beautiful fabric put together nicely and square for the back, and all the selvage is in the inside. And, you know, if there's a little more room, I would have trimmed it out for him. But,
Yeah.
but there's
if
not.
there was the room to trim it, I would.
And it makes me sad because I'm like, oh, because I know what's going to happen here.
So the top thread on our featherweight, we're using a thread post from the featherweight shop that allows our thread to be on sideways, which is how our fill is technically designed to come off
Because
the spool.
it's not, the spool should not spin.
So, yeah, the idea is our fill's not designed to spin, it's designed to just have the thread come off. So the featherweight shop designed this fancy little thread post so that the our fill could come off the way it's designed to. We have them in stock. I want to say they're like $14. They're great. They have a little plug here. You can take the bottom off of the spool. You don't have to.
So I normally do, because I put my thread on the other way because I'm a pedal to the metal sewer.
Yes, that way I can go as fast as I
That
want
way it
to.
doesn't hop out.
But it's a great little product for those of you who like a featherweight but love our fill. Yes, it's always okay to have your seam down the middle of the back. That's what we're doing. We're
Always.
the back of the quilt. We're just wanting to show you how the best way to do that. And one is to actually have, it can go horizontal or vertical. When loading on the long arm, I love being able to have it go horizontal. Sometimes if you've got a vertical seam and I can get away with quilting it sideways, I will, so that I'm still dealing with a horizontal seam. And the reason, and I want to tell you about the reason for this, and that is because wherever that seam is in your back, it just is tighter than the back.
Well,
so if we load it with a vertical seam, what you'll see before we pull it is a
it's double layered. So even though you press it open and stuff, you have a double layer of fabric here and a single here. So as that winds over the bar, over and over and over again, it's tight there and loose out here.
And so we get a bit of a swale. And so the tension is just a little bit less even on the back. It's hard to...
It's just harder to get it nice and
flatten that out.
The back won't be totally flat.
And so when we can have a horizontal seam, though, that tension gets spread this way instead of this way. And so between the bars, it's spread evenly. And so anytime I personally can, as a long armor, I will try and make the seam go horizontal. Just because...
As much as possible. The only time I don't is if the backing fabric's directional, the top of the quilt's directional,
the
panto's directional,
then I will deal with it.
Then I have to deal with it. If that's not the case...
And that's okay. It's all doable. But whenever possible, I love that the seam goes horizontal. But it's not a necessity. Jen's going to show you a trick here, though. She just stopped
I'm about to the end here. What I'm going to do is...
Because we left it folded.
I'm going to cut a slit.
She's going to tear a few inches.
Just going to tear a few inches. I'm not going to do all of it right now.
And then she's going to finish sewing.
Then I'll finish my seam.
And the reason we did that is now we found the exact middle, so we weren't guessing. And we know that fabric doesn't always feed perfectly evenly through the machine, right? Like, you have two pieces, they're perfectly cut. By the time you get to the end of the long seam,
they're not.
One's overhanging the other.
This is why we don't float borders.
Anyway.
So now that I started it,
she's going to finish.
She's going to finish ripping.
And now we have our fabric in two pieces instead of the one.
Right.
Although it's actually in one because we just seamed it together.
And it's square.
Yeah, and you can see how nicely those match. And the beauty of this is, like I showed you with the wide back, what we do to load it is we find the center and then put it out. But if one piece is longer than the other, it's really hard to find
the center of one is not going to be on the center of the other.
And then
it's going to be a little wonky.
Loading it square.
Right.
Now, so that's why we want to do this.
I left the selvage in there,
off her
and I'm going to tear off my selvage. Now, you could take this back to your table and use your rotary cutter.
So she cut about half an inch over.
This works great. It's faster.
Yes. I do it quite often with my rotary cutter. I am that way.
I'm not. I'm too lazy. And then I'm just going to go ahead and press this nice and flat.
So
and my back is ready.
Yep. And that's all there is to it, really, you guys. And what she can see here is these are the cut ends from off the bolt at this store. And if they're not matching up perfectly, because like I said, she bought 2 extra inches, although this one's looking pretty darn good.
Pretty good.
She could snip here and cut an inch off and tear an inch off on either end. And then we would know this guy's perfectly square and ready to go on the machine. So having a square back is beneficial. What we end up with is, once in a while, it happens rarely for us, but once in a while you end up with a pucker or something in your back, or the backs move, or it can be really tricky.
I have times where they bring me the back, and as we move through it, I have 6 extra inches on the left
and half an inch.
And half an inch on the right here. And that is a problem. It doesn't work. And so it's really important that the back be square.
What happens is we end up trying to finagle it, and then we can't focus on the right thing with the quilt. Now, Minky, we do a lot of Minky backs. We didn't really plan on talking about it a lot today, but the one thing I want to recommend with that, because same concept, whether Minky's 60 inches or 90 inches, it's rarely square on the bolt. It's really hard to cut that perfectly straight. Get the extra 1/8 of a yard, please, because it will help me be able to get it and deal with the variation in the back size, rather than trying to go really frugal on it and not end up having enough one side or the other.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So
I did have one back that was pieced in like 7 pieces once, and
which is doable, but you have to make sure you're squaring it.
But it had probably 12 different sides, and in the bottom right corner there was not enough.
Yeah,
it wasn't. In the end, her quilt, she had to trim it in like 2 inches off of her border, because there just wasn't enough back. And that was really unfortunate. It was a nice, beautiful pieced quilt.
Anyway, it always makes us sad when the back isn't quite what it needs to be.
The back is such a nice part of the quilt, and sometimes it can, I mean, you know, we like to use Minky a lot, but even with other fabrics, it can be
another fun element
of the quilt.
I love this newsprint I'm going to put on the back of the village, and it feels perfect for a village because, I mean, seriously, what is a village besides gossip and news?
Right. And help.
And help.
And help.
And so it just, we can have backs that are super fun and do fun things. And like, I just did my backslash one where I pieced my scraps into the back.
I love doing that.
All sorts of, like, you can have fun with the back, but there are tips, that's the word I'm looking for.
That's it.
That will make your back work better for you.
Always.
And will make us love you even more. It's like when we get a perfectly square top and a perfectly square back, it's like angels singing. It's
right?
amazing.
We're like, oh. Sometimes when people drop off quilts, I'm like, I love you.
But we love you all.
We do
and
love
we
you
realize that, like, this is all a process for everybody.
Oh,
we learn as we go.
Everybody's learning. We're still learning.
We're still learning. Like, hi, I'm not that old. I like to think I'm not that old. My husband keeps telling me I am. But,
He's
which
older.
is funny because he's older than me. But, you know, I haven't been doing this for 35 years. But I've learned a lot in the whole process, though, and we just like to try and share those things as we get to know them.
Go. Right. Share the love. Pass the information along. Help a friend.
So, yeah, for sure. Anyway, so I hope this was helpful. I hope you learned a few things. And we love quilting for you guys. We really do.
We do.
And
We have a lot of fun quilting.
Yeah,
I love getting to play with everybody's quilts, you know, because I can't make all the
because
quilts.
I can't make them all. So I love getting to play with the ones you all make. I mean, I make lots. But
I can't make all of them. I try.
If I could play with every fabric line, that'd be great. But I don't have the time. Because, you know, life, kids, job, you know, stuff.
Right. Even when your job's quilting.
Even when my job is quilting. It doesn't work. So, what are we doing next week? We had a plan.
We did have a plan.
It's still something about finishing a quilt. We'll talk.
I know. It's in your planner.
I wrote it all down. Anyway, so have
Our
a good
kids
one.
go back to school next week.
Oh my gosh. Actually, today's the last day of full virtual.
I know.
Because they have tomorrow off and Monday off. I'm
I
like,
know.
happy dance over here.
We're a little excited.
For reals. Anyway, it'll be something about finishing a quilt.
It'll be something about that. We'll let you know, like, maybe the night before or something.
I even planned them all out, and I
Can't remember.
don't remember. So, have a good week, you guys.
Right.
Come visit us. We are swimming in fabric.
We have so much new
So
fabric,
many new
you
things.
guys.
I can't even keep up on
gorgeous.
posting it all, but I'll give you guys a hint. Cider, that was supposed to be here in November, finally here. Line work, restocked. True Colors, restocked for probably the last time, you guys, so get it.
Linework's definitely the last
Moonlight's
stuff
here.
Moonlight by
It's
Kaufman
gorgeous.
is gorgeous.
We totally forgot we ordered it, and then we were like, oh yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Moody Bloom, we still haven't put away. So much new fabric. So much new fabric.
There's a box on the
There's
floor
a box
we
on the
haven't
floor
opened
haven't
yet.
even opened. We restocked Fantasy.
We did.
Last shot, you guys, if you want to get in on the Fantasy Block of the Month, there's a couple spots left. Last shot, so get in on that.
Yeah.
And
Seriously, swimming. Come and check it out.
Swimming in fabric this week.
It's always fun.
So have a good day, and we'll see you
next week.
Next week. Where's my thingamabob?
None.